know the feeling? It's having a kid who can explain the structural engineering of the International Space Station at breakfast, but then manages to lose both shoes in their backpack before you even get out of the car. It's that wild mix of wait, they're a genius, and wait, why is this so hard? If you've ever felt like your child is too gifted for some support services, but too struggling for the gifted track, you aren't crazy. You're a 2E parent. So grab your cup of coffee, as today we're going to be talking about the unicorn of the school system, Twice Exceptionality. Welcome back to Special Ed, IEPs, 504s, oh my, conversations with DCSEAC. I'm your host, Meredith, and today joining me is Aleia. And I'm just going to say I am super excited about today. I'm excited to have you guys here. Parents are asking more and more about 2E, so it's definitely the buzzword of the year. I'm excited that you guys are willing to join me today. I would like you guys to introduce yourselves and tell me about your roles.
My name is Natasha, and I have the privilege of serving as the Director of Advanced Academics and Gifted Programming in Douglas County School District.
I'm Steve Whited. I am a Special Education Coordinator with Douglas County School District. I work in the Chaparral feeder for special education, but I also partner with the Advanced Academics team to provide some of the Twice Exceptional trainings.
Awesome. So for a parent who just heard this term for the first time, how do you define Twice Exceptionality in Douglas County?
We'll kick it off because I think that the definition of Twice Exceptionality is a really important place to start, mostly because it is a term that is thrown around in a lot of circles. And so understanding what the legal or formal term of Twice Exceptionality means is really important in our collaboration with families. So in the state of Colorado, Twice Exceptionality means that a student has been formally identified for gifted services through the process that's outlined in statute through the Exceptional Children's Educational Act, and that child qualifies for special education services through IDEA and or qualifies for accommodations through a Section 504 plan. So to be twice exceptional, a student must qualify for both of those things, gifted education and either special education services or Section 504.
Definitely seems to be a masking problem within this 2E group. We've talked about this in other podcasts, especially the one we did with Lenny talking about dyslexia, where a student is trying to hide that they're having a struggle because they've been identified as this gifted, super smart student, and they can ride under the radar because they're smart, they're very intelligent. So what is something a parent can look out for at home that a classroom might not be seeing?
Anytime parents see big splits between what a student is doing at school and what they're doing at home is important. Oftentimes parents come to us and say, this kid is falling apart at home. They're struggling social emotionally when they get home, but teachers are reporting that they're fine. So looking at those discrepancies between the different environments and seeing our kids masking throughout the day to fit in with normal, typical peers, and how does that impact them social emotionally? Also looking at those cognitive profiles with the academic splits. There could be areas of high functioning within areas where they really struggle. We see this a lot with our ADHD kids with executive functioning, planning out tasks, organizing and attending. They're super high, but then they just struggle to hold on to those materials. Look for the differences in what you know your student can do and can achieve, and then areas where they struggle.
Masking is another term that we hear quite a bit. Unpacking what that might look like both at school and at home is really important because students can mask at school as well as at home. I liked what you said about thinking about dyslexia as one of the areas or disabilities that a student might mask. Masking can be intentional and unintentional. Oftentimes with our twice exceptional learners, our gifted learners, unintentionally are masking because they may have really high processing speed. They may be able to decode whole words and have really high levels of comprehension. I'm riffing off your dyslexia example. Because students are accessing high level vocabulary through their cognitive abilities and high levels of comprehension, they may be unintentionally masking characteristics of dyslexia or dyslexia itself in terms of struggles with phonics or phonetic awareness. Another thing about what families or parents and caregivers look for, like Steven said, a high level of exhaustion when students come home because they are masking during the day. Some of our students who are twice exceptional do have a big difference in their cognitive ability and perhaps their processing speed. So they are really working hard during the day to process the information that they are receiving while they're in the classroom. There's also sometimes a high level of energy being used to deal with differences in executive functioning skills. We also have gifted students who have a high level of perfectionism. So they are checking, double checking, triple checking their work during the school day, which takes a lot of energy. When those students come home, we hear parents often say, my student completely falls apart when they come home because of the energy that they've been expending throughout the day. Another thing parents should look for is the time that it takes when they're watching their student perform tasks at home, whether that's through homework or how students may be able to explain lots of complex ideas. When they're writing, it's taking them a very long time to get those thoughts from their head onto paper. Those are things that teachers can see. Those are things that teachers can often see at school, but that's something that parents can be looking for when they're watching their children at home, is where do they see their child showing high levels of, or atypical levels of understanding with complex problems or complex thoughts, where at school, they're not exhibiting that same level of understanding.
And this idea of masking, they call it masking for a reason. Like it's hard to see, especially when we're talking about twice exceptional students, because those strengths play against a disability. So disability often masks what strengths the student has, or vice versa. The student's so high that it masks some of those disabilities that could be impacting them in the learning environment. So it's really just looking for those inconsistencies and finding time for everybody to get together and just talk about what they're seeing. And we always encourage more voices at those tables. We want parent input. We want to hear from classroom teachers. We want to hear what's happening in these different environments so we can pinpoint where that breakdown is with students' abilities.
You're touching on my next question, stepping into the referral process. So how can a parent start this conversation if they're noticing one or the other or both?
I would say that conversation always starts with the classroom teacher. The classroom teacher is going to have a lot of experience working with same age peers, so they can see what's typical. If they're seeing any asynchrony between their skills and other students' skills, they're going to notice that, but they're also going to see those challenges. I think when we start that conversation there, it starts out really well, really organic, and then we can bring in other people, starting with GT facilitators, SPED team, going through the special education referral process or the gifted and talented referral process, start having those voices come in and start looking through different lenses. But that classroom teacher is really going to be the person that knows the most at the school about the student. And then we want to hear from parents too. So having that parent teacher communication.
Yeah, it also depends on where your child is in the service delivery process. So sometimes we have students who are already being served through special education, and parents have a trusted relationship with a special education provider. So in combination with the general education teacher, if a family already has a relationship with a special education provider, starting with that person is appropriate to say, hey, I've been seeing these X, Y, or Z characteristics of my child. I've been learning more about twice exceptionality. Vice versa, if a child's already been in the identification process for gifted, or we have many students who have already been identified for gifted services. And again, as that child ages up, parents may be seeing more characteristics, or teachers seeing more characteristics of twice exceptionality. So starting with the gifted education facilitator, every one of our schools in Douglas County have a trained gifted education facilitator, and that person has expected training in twice exceptionality. So reaching out to that person at any time for more information is appropriate for any parent.
So you're saying it can go through either the special education team or the gifted coordinator, and then is it joint once that request goes through, or is one like evaluating more for the gifted and the other is evaluating for the special education piece?
Yeah, it depends on where your child is. If a child's already been identified for special education services, then it's a partnership between the gifted education facilitator, the general education teacher, the special education provider, and the parent. So we expect no matter where it starts, our expectation is then the gifted education facilitator and the special education team is partnering with the gen ed teacher to think about what's the next right step in the pathway, whether that is seeking out additional assessment through a special education evaluation if the child hasn't already experienced that or gone through that process, or if a child has never gone through the gifted identification process. We expect that the school-based staff is partnering together to determine what is the next right step for our students. If you've met one twice exceptional student, you've met one twice exceptional student. A lot of the determination of what's next is on a case-by-case basis, looking at what we already know about a child and their learning needs, and then what do we need to find out more about in order to serve them.
How does the district balance test scores with a parent's observations of asynchronous development? Like their child is 10 years ahead in math, but 3 years behind emotional regulation.
That's often a struggle, especially when identifying those twice exceptional learners. We have a lot of information, but it doesn't always match up nice and neatly with some of the boxes we're always looking for. Our process starts with a robust evaluation, whether it's advanced academics, looking at an ALP, looking at a 504 or an IEP. We're going to start with an evaluation where we're gathering informal data from classrooms, how students are doing on their benchmark reading assessments, how they're doing on math lessons, peer observations. What do those look like? Is the student organized in the classroom? Follow that up with more formalized evaluations. Could be cognitive, social emotional, academic, just trying to get a whole picture of the child and see where they have an area of impact educationally to look at a 504 on IEP, or saying that this student is gifted in this area. We want that full body of evidence. We want a lot of data in order to make that decision. Part of that is those conversations with the parents. We always take that into consideration, but we don't just look at one piece of data. We want as many evaluative points as we possibly can get to make a whole determination and figure out what those educational needs are for each kid.
I think that's a really important piece to consider, whether you're looking at special education evaluation as a start, gifted identification as a start, or you're doing both at the same time. In both instances, special education evaluation and gifted identification, we are required, and we do collect an entire body of evidence that includes what you referenced in your question, test scores, but we look at cognitive test scores, we look at achievement test scores. We're also required to collect observational data that includes characteristics of the student as a learner, both in school and out of school. We also have surveys and questionnaires for the students. So we collect that body of evidence in the identification process for gifted and in the special education evaluation process. So in either circumstance, are we making a determination or an identification based on one test score on one day? It's always a body of evidence that includes multiple pieces of data over time.
I joined the advanced academics team a few years ago. And when I first joined, I was like, oh, great. I'm going to have to learn another way to collect body of evidence and figure out how to get students identified. Once I actually got into this work, it became really clear really fast that the process is the exact same. So if we have a parent who's used to the SPED process and they're being referred for GT, just know that it's not going to be anything new. The process is similar. So we're just making sure that we have all the data necessary. So that would be my one piece of advice for parents, is that the processes might sound confusing and daunting, but they're really similar in nature.
I know you used another term that parents are asking about, asynchronous development. I think with our twice exceptional students, it's really important to understand that we are looking for atypical characteristics, atypical data. Many of our gifted learners have characteristics that are representative of asynchronous development, and they are not twice exceptional. So the difference in development cognitively or understanding complex concepts and maybe socially, or we hear parents saying, my child learned to read at the age of 3 and still can't tie her shoes, right? So asynchronous development is a characteristic of many gifted learners. We want to make sure that when we are hearing information from parents about extreme asynchronous development, that we're not just brushing it off as a typical gifted learner, but we're doing our due diligence to look at those characteristics closely to make sure the students aren't masking unintentionally or intentionally a disability that we need to make sure that we're identifying so that we can serve the students correctly. It's like a sleuth. We have to work together as a team to look at all the data that we can to determine how to best serve the student. We talk a lot about identification, but when I'm talking to parents, I want to emphasize that the purpose of identification and evaluation is so that we can adequately serve your children in a school setting. That is the entire purpose of collecting all of this evidence, and all of the data that we're looking for is so that we can align our service delivery and our instruction, both in the general education setting and otherwise, to your child's needs.
I love that. So we're going to talk about IEP versus 504. You talked a little bit about this, but could you clarify why 2E student might have one versus the other?
So when we look at 504 versus IEP, we're looking at, does the student require specialized instruction to help them make progress towards grade level standards? We do that through that body of evidence that we collect through that evaluation. And that evaluation drives the individualized education plan, the IEP. Talks about what are the services a student requires and what are their goals for the next year. For every IEP, we have goals, services, accommodations. And then we have to meet within 364 days to review those, or more frequently if a parent requests it. So every year we're looking at those goals, and we want to make adequate progress towards grade level standards. For a student who has a 504, we're just saying that they require additional access or accommodations to help them access the general education learning environment. So if I showed up tomorrow with 2 broken legs, I would need a wheelchair to help me get into work. This could be the same for a student who just needs access to school. They don't need specialized instruction. They just need help getting in the school to access that education, like I would to get to work. So that's an over exaggerated example of what an accommodation could be, but it helps put it into focus. So a lot of times in the classroom, it's just accessing it. For a lot of our 2E students, the barrier isn't necessarily understanding. It's more, how do we get that information out? It's that output piece. So it could be extended time for writing assignments where we have this high verbal comprehension, but when it comes to writing, our processing speed is a little lower, or we have ADHD and we're 4 sentences ahead in our mind, our hand just can't keep up. So we need longer to do it, or we need more graphic organizers to help us stay organized. It doesn't necessarily require specialized instruction for that 504 piece, because students can do the work. They already have that knowledge. It's just making sure that they can get it out.
How does the advanced learning plan talk to the IEP or the 504? Do they live in separate worlds? Is there a master plan for the child?
That's one of the questions that we get the most from our parent community. So I'm glad you asked that question. While the plans are separate, and I want to emphasize that, the IEP has a very specific purpose. The IEP is outlining instruction, specialized instruction, accommodations, how that's going to be delivered. The 504 is outlining accommodations for students to access their learning in their learning environment. The advanced learning plan is outlining the goals, the instructional strategies, which may include accommodations as well, based on all of the evidence that was gathered and all the data that we looked at in the gifted identification process. While all 3 of those are separate plans with a separate purpose, for our twice exceptional or our multi-exceptional learners, it's imperative that we're looking at them to make sure that they are aligned so that we don't have a disconnect. We don't want a student not to be able to access when we're looking at what's necessary through an IEP in terms of instructional delivery. We want to make sure that is not interfering with the student's need to access higher level instruction or complex instruction. At a high school level, we want to make sure that if a student needs access to a course or an instruction or service delivery time, that doesn't conflict with access to an AP class that's written out in their advanced learning plan. At the elementary level, we want to ensure that students have the ability to express their understanding when it makes sense. For instance, if what we're measuring in a student is complex understanding of text, and that child does have a learning disability that requires different levels of instruction, or perhaps that student can't write and express that understanding through written language, we want to ensure that the IEP and or the 504 is aligned. So we're using accommodations for the student so that they can share their deep understanding of complex text orally through something that's recorded, and not blocking that access because we've said a child needs additional support with writing or additional support with reading. So I was trying to find some examples that parents might be able to see in their own schools, but the plans are separate. They should be aligned. There is not one master plan, so we don't have a twice exceptional plan. We do maintain separate plans. However, it's imperative, like I said, that our services are aligned through all three of those plans.
And just the collaboration between the plans, making sure that we do have representation. Yes, we keep everything separate, but if we're in an IEP meeting, we can have the GT facilitator there to listen and hear what is on that plan. And then vice versa, when we go to the ALP, having a SPED representative there to hear how those are aligned, so we can make sure that we are both serving the strength and building up that need that a child has too. So constant collaboration between the two parties.
Just to jump in with our parent perspective, it sounds incredibly nuanced, because especially when you get into higher level academic classes where the rigor is strong, the teacher's getting very strict and holding on to this is what you have to accomplish, especially when you're talking about AP classes and the very specific rules regarding the testing and whatnot. It takes nuance to tease out what is your learning disability that's protected by your IEP or 504, and how are we going to get creative to allow you to demonstrate that you're meeting the requirements of this course. I love that you guys brought it up, and to the parents out there, that's also where you can jump in and say, hey, let's try this. You get to be part of that IEP to say, hey, we're accommodating, but we're able to demonstrate in this way. And then going and talking to those teachers, because teachers like kids, but if they understand what's going on, that, hey, we're really meeting this twice exceptionality, and there's a need to allow a different way for the student to demonstrate. So don't be afraid to say that, even if they're like, it's okay. We can go in and say, no, this is good. We can still do this. I had a question. I was wondering for our 2E students, since there's a high amount of masking and a lot of pressure and mental health and things like that accompany being 2E or being anything where you're like, hey, I'm different, and people aren't able to see that and finally being identified. Is a 504 allowed to have an accommodation that is mental health services, or would that automatically pull you over into the IEP side? I wasn't sure if 504 covered that.
We haven't talked about that, but a 504, you can have access to a counselor. You can have accommodations built into your schedule where you're still seeing that school-wide counselor. It's not as in-depth with the mental health piece as an IEP would be, where you're looking at targeted skill intervention for mental health, but providing that access, having small groups, working on peer relationship things are allowed in a 504.
In alignment with the advanced learning plan, every student who's identified gifted is required to have an advanced learning plan. That advanced learning plan has to include at least one academic goal for their identified academic strength areas or talent areas that the student is identified in. It also has to include an affective goal or a social emotional goal. That is part of state statute. And so it's important with our twice exceptional learners, all of our identified gifted learners, but especially for our twice exceptional learners, to make sure that inside of that affective goal, we are looking at what that child might need through executive functioning skills or social emotional support, and looking at how those two things can align through their 504 or their IEP. So that's an excellent place to look for that alignment, because many times the goals may be the same, and we can double dip in the service delivery. Many of our schools are starting to work with their school counselor and their mental health teams to have small groups designed around characteristics or needs of students, not the names of students' plans. So when we're looking at small groups to address perfectionism or executive functioning, we may have a group of students who are twice exceptional. They also include students who are only being served through special education or maybe only being served through gifted education. Those students are meeting together with a school counselor or mental health provider to address the learning that they need. And we're not necessarily separating them out by name of plan, but we're looking at student need.
I love that. And even though I'm a fan of labels, I'll tell you why in a second. I love the idea of having a class based upon your actual need. I would want to show up to a class if you said, Aleia, we have a class about how can you be more effective when you're middle-aged, perimenopausal, and have ADHD. I would be more likely to show up to that class because that directly affects what I need. On the flip side, though, I'm a fan of labels, especially for our kids that have high enough cognitive functioning or are able to understand it, to tell a child, at least in my experience, hey, this is why your brain is doing this thing. This is explaining, it unlocks that mystery. It takes away a lot of that shame. And this is a sort of niche question, but do you know if the counselors or mental health people, are they explaining twice exceptionality? Do they try and explain to these kids what it is? I think it's cool. Like, I think twice exceptionality is cool. We're an entirely neurodiverse family, so we talk a lot about the empowerment of our ADHD brain or what does autism bring us. I think twice exceptionality is pretty cool. It's, hey, I'm really stinking smart, but my brain learns in a slightly tweaky different way. And that's all three of my children right there. So do you know if there's any type of labeling or teaching kids within the schools?
Yeah, there absolutely is. I have some very specific examples of where it's happening at all three levels, elementary, middle, and high. We're working to have this be a consistent practice where our gifted education facilitators and our counselors and mental health staff are working with students to understand themselves as neurodiverse learners. The more we can have our students understand their own learning needs, we can then teach them self-advocacy skills, self-regulation skills, the nuances of their executive functioning needs. We're working closely in partnership with our mental health staff when we're thinking about this kind of support for all of our students, looking at how are we providing very specific support and understanding for our neurodiverse learners. All of our schools are working toward social emotional learning or essential skills learning, and teaching students about their own needs and their own neurodiversity is a part of that.
I think we're doing a better job with SPED. We invite our middle school or high school students to IEP meetings. Ultimately, those plans, whether it's ALP, 504, IEP, they are plans for the student, not for parents, not for teachers. They're the student's plan. So as we get older, we invite those students because we want them to have a real world knowledge of what their deficits are, what their strengths are, so they can access those or start building some compensatory strategies for when they get out of school. They don't necessarily have adults redirecting them all the time. We want them to be real world earners, ready to go. So we're doing a better job of trying to get that to younger grades so we can start identifying those things earlier and start having kids work through those. Sometimes there are some barriers to that, but we're getting there. We're improving on it. And we try to invite students as often as possible.
And on the advanced learning plan side, we're required to have a student component for all advanced learning plans. We do know in a district this size that systemic implementation is a goal. That's part of our journey. I don't want people to think that this is happening 100% all of the time, but our goal is to ensure that there's a student component of every advanced learning plan process. So in many situations, like Steve's saying, our GT facilitators are having one-on-one conversations or small group conversations with our students, no matter what grade they are, as they're writing their advanced learning plan goals. In that process, they can talk to them more about understanding what their own needs are, so the students can be an active part of writing their ALP goals. For our twice exceptional learners, that's a perfect time when you're having that, let's say, advanced learning plan conversation. How are you weaving in conversations about understanding their disability if they have a disability, or what their needs might be through accessing their learning through their 504? That is something that we're working on as a team, as a student support services team, with our mental health professionals, our special education providers. We have students who are twice exceptional who are also multilingual learners. It's very important that we're working closely with our ELD teachers to ensure that we understand cultural implications and linguistic implications for our multilingual learners and their families. So oftentimes we're putting 3 plans together, an IEP, an advanced learning plan, and a plan for our multilingual learners.
I think a struggle I've heard parents have is the general education teachers that are supporting these students. They're aware of more of the gifted side of the student, but is there training to really help understand the behavior side? I think we even have a board member whose child is affective needs who is also gifted and talented. And so it's very difficult for this parent to navigate how to advocate for her student because it doesn't seem like teachers might be trained to support both these plans at the same time.
Yeah, this is a toughie. Yes, we do have some training for all staff members for behavior, but behavior is a very wide term, and behavior can look a lot of different things. It can be that internalizing behavior, anxiety, depression, things that are harder to see, or it could be those outward behaviors that we see a lot with our younger kids, throwing of pencils, kicking of trash cans. And every person comes in with their own level of comfort with that. So even with the training that we do provide, it goes back to teacher comfort with dealing with behavior. Not all of our teachers are necessarily at the same emotional level where they're used to seeing this happen, or where those big escalations don't escalate them as well. The ultimate goal is to keep all kids safe. And we have 2 different teams that work with our special education population to help with that behavior. We have a behavior team and an autism team. They come in and support our gen ed teachers with putting in accommodations, looking to see if we need to develop more formalized plans for consistent response for adults, consistent behavior from students. We partner with those teams a lot, and they do have coaches that come out and help support gen ed teachers as well. But the big piece of that is it goes back to staff comfort and overall student safety. We certainly try to plan for every student, and yes, it is a lot easier to plan for students that are high achievers. They're the ones that are constantly doing what the teacher wants. They're working as expected. They're not saying anything. They're not blurting out. But we're seeing more and more behavior, and we just got to get more and more familiar with responses to that and how to be consistent with our approaches to support those students, bringing in those specialists, those people that really know how to deal with behavior, and leveraging school counselors, that IMTSS system of support that schools have with counselors, social workers, psychologists to help come in and support that behavior and address the underlying need for that.
I want to address the larger question in terms of professional development and learning opportunities for our general education teachers, because I think there were 2 questions in what you asked. Steve did a fantastic job talking about some of our students that have the highest level of need. So when a student is identified gifted and also requires special education services through an effective needs program, we consider that a very high level of need, intensive needs of students. We have hundreds, thousands of students who have either universal needs or targeted needs. And our twice exceptional learners often fall into those 2 tiers. And so we're very aware of the need for our general education teachers to have training on how to identify and serve our twice exceptional learners. Steve works closely with our team and other experts to provide ongoing professional learning opportunities for all of our staff, including our general education staff. Over the past 3 to 5 years, we've developed layers of training. We have an Understanding the Twice Exceptional Learner course, an 8-hour course that is your general understanding. We offer that throughout the year. And oftentimes, Steve just offered this a couple weeks ago with another partner to teach this course. So for that course, we oftentimes have teams of 3 to 5 people from a school that includes a general education teacher, special education teacher, mental health provider, sometimes an ELD teacher, sometimes an administrator. Principals and assistant principals more often are coming together as a team. And we offer that Understanding the Twice Exceptional Learner course throughout the entire year. We also have shorter professional learning opportunities that are more specific to populations, such as the Twice Exceptional Learner with ADHD, social emotional supports for twice exceptional learners, 2E and autism. Those are 2.5-hour courses that we offer throughout the year. We encourage our gen ed teachers to come with a partner and to come in teams. Every year we have more opportunities. We also are partnering with experts in the field from across the nation. This year, Emily Kircher Morris has come to provide professional learning about creating neurodiverse, affirming schools. We had over 100 participants, which included gen ed teachers, administrators, special education, special service providers, looking at how are they creating systems and structures affirming for our neurodiverse learners. We have a lot of layers that we're building for professional learning because we understand that our gen ed teachers are with our students the most often. Most often, they come out of pre-service training with little to no experience or education for gifted and twice exceptional. And so we're trying to increase those opportunities as a priority in Douglas County.
So for advice for a parent, maybe the parent suggesting bringing in the coordinator, but maybe asking for that behavior team to come in, or holding a meeting with both the ALP, the general ed, and the special education team. Can they do that as a way to address what's going on? We want to be collaborative with the teachers as well. I'm just trying to figure out a way to talk to this parent with her frustration that she's having with her student on proactive ways or better engagement that she can bring to the table so everyone can now become on the same page.
I think having that collaborative meeting with all parties, the GT facilitator, the SPED team, and the gen ed teacher, and having that parent voice there, that's super important. Want to get to a point where we're having that collaborative conversation and identify some areas that a student is struggling. We know that there's going to be frustrating times for both parents and for teachers, and identifying what the cause of that behavior is so we can help prevent that in the future, work around some of those antecedent strategies or the things that are happening before the behavior to help the student be successful. That's a lot of times where those behavior team and autism team members can really come in and support. If looking at what's happening before a student gets escalated. Do we need to reduce the workload for a student at a certain point? Like after 15 minutes, they get frustrated and they shut down. Or are we expecting a student to read this passage and they just can't read at this time? So is it creating frustration in and of itself? But yeah, just supporting that student and getting everybody in there so we're seeing behavior through the same lens. Usually that referral does start with the school team reaching out to the behavior team or autism team. Take those concerns to your school team. They all have qualified personnel on staff. At every school, there's a school counselor. And then there's additionally a school psychologist or social worker who works with students who have 504s or IEPs. So take it to those professionals, and then they will certainly reach out to get a better understanding of the behavior if they're at a loss as well.
To answer your question, Meredith and Aleia, it's absolutely appropriate to encourage parents to ask for the gifted education facilitator to be part of an IEP team meeting or even a special education evaluation meeting. You could ask for the gifted education facilitator to be part of that meeting, even if your child is not already identified gifted. Oftentimes, we have students who are twice exceptional and they've only been identified as one or the other. Back to our conversation about masking. I would expect that the gifted education facilitator is invited to IEP meetings, or at least invited to provide input into IEP meetings for students who are already identified both gifted and identified for special education services. But what we don't talk about enough is if a parent suspects that their child might be twice exceptional, it is absolutely appropriate to invite the gifted education facilitator to an IEP meeting to listen and learn about that child so that they could suggest that they go through the gifted identification process. If a child's already identified both gifted and is identified for special education services, it is appropriate for the gifted education facilitator to be part of the IEP meeting. And like Stephen said earlier, for a special education service provider to be part of an ALP conversation. Having those representatives in that conversation helps us think about how we can serve the whole child.
I feel like so much the 2E experience has got to be misdiagnosis or something that was missed, because really you find whatever's loudest first. If the behavior is loudest, that's what you find first. If the intelligence or that academic exceptionalism is, you might find that first. And I experienced that within my own family where the struggle that's happening is so internal that it's missed until far later. And so you really do have this period of not being quite understood. This is a parent to parent podcast. Thank you to both Steve and to Natasha, but it's refreshing to hear someone say, yeah, this is what we teach. This is what we try. But teachers are individuals too. They're all individuals and they're all in different places. It doesn't mean that teachers are bad. It's not that they're trying to hurt, but we often run into this where we're like, our special education team wasn't where anything blew up. It was when they were trying to exist in that gen classroom. The majority of our students who are served by special education and gifted and talented are in general education classes. That's where they're receiving that. Meredith touched on it. Something I've learned over this podcast is that you never stop being engaged, being advocating, and it's good, but going and talking to those teachers. I send obnoxious emails like, hey, you're my kiddo's new teacher. Let me tell you all the amazing things about my kid, but like trying to reach out. And for parents who may feel shy or might feel like they're stepping on people's toes, or a lot of it comes back to that labeling. Some people are uncomfortable with labeling. I want to encourage you, as someone who was a teacher for a long time, when I got a nice, hey, this is my kid, let me tell you a little bit about them email from a parent, I was like, wow, this parent's involved. I never was like, oh, they're wasting my time. I was excited because I taught high school. I was excited they reached out to me at all and wanted to connect. And for parents out there, if you have a 2E kiddo, and I think there's a lot more 2E kiddos out there than we think. Look at every engineer from the 80s, but whatever. Let's put that aside. It's complicated and it's often been layered with something that's been missed or a misunderstanding, or you might have some school trauma. Go ahead and reach out, especially before there's a crisis, before there's a blow up, and just try and explain to them. But not every teacher is going to understand a massive blow up from a kid who's presented relatively typically, and not every administrator either. And so they sometimes are going to drop this consequence hammer that really is going to work against your child's special need. You got to join the conversation and say, hey, can we also look at it from this angle? It's disheartening, but also empowering as a parent. You can't ever let go. You got to keep being part of that conversation. My only words of advice is everyone else is there too. That's what everyone is doing. They're showing up every day trying to find out what's best and to help your kiddo learn. But I do want to acknowledge it's hard. It's a lot of hard work and different personalities and people who understand and don't understand. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, I get it.
If parents are frustrated or they just need more advice or just want to talk through this process, I'm always here for them to reach out to. We partner a lot with parents and with different schools to make sure that their voices are being heard and kids are being supported. That's our overall goal, make sure that every kid is being supported. Just how can we support them in the gen ed classroom to be successful? I'm always here to listen to parents and have conversations with school teams about what they're seeing and making sure that we are connecting everybody to get on the same page.
I feel a change within our school district, within our world, that there is a change of moving away from your disability, even the word neurodivergence or different learning, that it's so empowering and wonderful to start to say, I learn differently. I love that. I feel our district doing that as we continue to keep moving forward, because we have more and more neurodivergent minds everywhere, and learning how to harness those and get the best out of it is for the best of all of us. So I'm excited that we're having this conversation and that you two professionals are working really hard to help our district support those kids.
I want to extend my thanks too. I've been in this work longer than I'm willing to admit on a podcast. I have seen exponential growth in our ability to collaborate to serve our twice exceptional learners over the last 5 to 7 years. I'm really excited about the partnerships that we're fostering with parents, with community partnerships, and what we're able to do when we put our teams and our minds together to serve our neurodiverse learners. I'm glad you're seeing that from a parent perspective, because I'm really excited about the work that we've been able to do in the last 5 to 7 years to serve our students and their families.
Be sure to check the show notes for any resources that have been mentioned. You can also learn more about DCSEAC on our social media or go to our webpage, dcseac.org. If you like this podcast, please like, share, follow, and let other parents know about us. We're just trying to get conversations out there. If you have any suggestions, definitely let us know on those social medias or even at info@dcseac.org. That's our email. We're really excited. We have lots of conversations that are coming up. So until next time.
Bye, guys.
Bye.